You are standing in a dimly lit workshop in Alexandria. The year is 50 AD. The air smells of olive oil and hot metal. You can hear the hiss of steam escaping from a peculiar bronze sphere mounted above a cauldron of boiling water. The sphere begins to spin. Faster, faster still. The inventor, hero of Alexandria, watches with steady eyes as his aeolipile rotates with impossible speed, driven by nothing but heated vapor. This is a steam engine. Not in Victorian England. Not powering trains across continents. Here. Now. Nearly 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. And then the fire dies. The sphere slows. The invention is forgotten, dismissed as a curious toy, nothing more. You might believe that progress moves in a straight line, that each generation builds carefully upon the last, that we stand at the pinnacle of human ingenuity simply because we exist in the present moment. But history whispers a different truth. Civilizations have risen with technologies that would not be rediscovered for centuries. Inventors have glimpsed futures their societies were not ready to embrace. And countless breakthroughs have vanished into the silence of time, waiting in shadows for someone to remember them again. Consider this. The ancient Greeks possessed a mechanical computer. The Romans had concrete stronger than what we used throughout most of the 20th century. Medieval Europeans created unbreakable Damascus steel through processes we still cannot fully replicate. These were not primitive peoples stumbling in darkness. They were minds as sharp as ours, solving problems with breathtaking elegance, only to have their solutions erased by war, neglect, or simple disbelief. Tonight we journey into the forgotten corners of human innovation. We will walk through workshops where brilliant devices hummed and clicked, performing tasks that would seem impossible for their era. We will meet inventors whose names have faded, whose creations were too strange, too advanced, or too dangerous for their time. And we will ask ourselves a haunting question. How many keys to our future have we already lost to the past? So, before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we will drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You stand in the ruins of a Roman shipwreck off the coast of Antikythera, a small Greek island. The year is 1901. You are a sponge diver, and your hands have just closed around something impossibly intricate beneath the waves. Bronze gears. Dozens of them, interlocking with a precision that should not exist in the ancient world. You surface, gasping, holding a corroded lump that will take over a century to understand. This is the Antikythera mechanism, the world's first analog computer, and has been sleeping beneath the Mediterranean for more than 2,000 years. When you examine this device closely, under the harsh light of modern X-ray technology, you see complexity that makes your breath catch. 30 bronze gears, some with triangular teeth cut with such accuracy that only the finest Swiss watchmakers could rival them. The mechanism tracked the movements of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets. It predicted eclipses. It calculated the dates of the Olympic Games. It contained a sophistication of astronomical knowledge that would not be matched again until the 14th century. Imagine the workshop where this was created. You can smell the metal shavings, the oil used to lubricate the gears. You can hear the careful tapping of a craftsman's hammer, shaping each tooth with patience that borders on devotion. Somewhere in the Hellenistic world, perhaps in Rhodes or Pergamon, a school of engineers understood gear ratios, epicyclic motion, and differential mechanisms. They built devices we can barely comprehend from fragments and corrosion. And then, silence. No other surviving examples exist. No complete manuals. No workshops discovered with similar tools. Just this one corroded survivor, pulled from the sea by accident, dismissed for decades as an oddity too advanced to be real. Scholars argued it must be a medieval intrusion, contamination in the wreck site. The idea that ancient Greeks could create mechanical computers was simply too strange to accept. But the evidence does not lie. The inscriptions are Greek. The design matches astronomical theories from the period. And slowly, painstakingly, researchers have reconstructed what this machine could do. It was not a simple calendar. It was a device to model the cosmos, to predict the heavens with gear-driven precision. It represented a technological lineage we did not know existed. And when that lineage ended, the knowledge vanished with it. You wonder what else lies beneath the waves. What other workshops burned? What other inventors took their secrets to the grave, believing their children would continue the work? How many times has humanity reached a peak of understanding, only to tumble backward into darkness, forgetting what it once knew? The Antikythera mechanism is not just a device, it is a reminder. Progress is fragile, knowledge is not guaranteed, and the past may have been far stranger than we dare imagine. You leave the museum where the mechanism now rests, behind thick glass in Athens. Outside, the modern city hums with electronic devices, smartphones, computers. None of them would exist without gears, without the fundamental understanding that motion can be calculated, predicted, controlled, and you cannot help but think, somewhere, an ancient engineer smiled as their bronze gears turned, calculating the movement of planets. They knew. They absolutely knew what they had created. You are in China. The year is 132 AD. You stand in the court of the Han Dynasty, watching as a massive bronze vessel shakes slightly. It is taller than you, shaped like a wine jar, covered in intricate engravings of mountains and mythical creatures. 8 dragon heads protrude from its sides, each holding a bronze ball in its mouth. Beneath each dragon sits a bronze toad, mouth open, waiting. Suddenly, without warning, one dragon releases its ball. The metallic clang echoes through the hall as the ball falls into the toad's mouth. The direction is west, and sure enough, days later, a messenger arrives. An earthquake has struck in the western provinces, hundreds of miles away. This is the invention of Zhang Heng, astronomer, mathematician, poet, and creator of the world's first seismoscope. Not a device to measure earthquake intensity, but one to detect the direction of distant tremors, allowing the emperor to send aid before news could travel by conventional means. In an age without electronics, without even a clear understanding of what earthquakes truly were, Zhang Heng built a machine sensitive enough to detect vibrations from hundreds of miles away. Inside the vessel, hidden from view, hangs a heavy pendulum. When seismic waves arrive, the pendulum sways. Its motion triggers an internal mechanism, a series of levers that releases the ball from the dragon facing the earthquake's direction. The design is genius, the execution is flawless, and for centuries it works. Dynasty after dynasty, the bronze jar sits in imperial courts, faithfully pointing toward disaster. Then it is lost, not destroyed in some dramatic catastrophe, but simply forgotten. Dynasties fall, knowledge scatters. By the time later scholars read Zhang Heng's descriptions, they cannot fully recreate the internal mechanism. Modern replicas exist, but they are guesses, approximations. We can build satellites that detect earthquakes from space, but we cannot perfectly reconstruct a bronze jar from the 2nd century. The irony is not lost on you. You run your hand along the cool bronze in a museum reconstruction. You wonder about the craftsmen who forged this. Did they understand what they were building? Did they grasp the principle of inertia, of pendulum motion, or did they simply follow Zhang Heng's instructions with faith? You imagine the first test, the first time a ball dropped and everyone held their breath, waiting, and then the confirmation arrived. It works. It actually works. This is the pattern you begin to notice. Brilliant minds appear, scattered across centuries and civilizations. They solve problems with elegance and insight. They create devices that should not be possible. And then, for reasons mundane or catastrophic, the knowledge evaporates. Books burn. Workshops close. Students do not appear. And humanity forgets. Not because we are stupid, but because knowledge requires continuity. It requires someone to care, to preserve, to pass forward. Break that chain just once, and centuries of understanding can vanish in a single generation. Zhang Heng's seismoscope is not alone in this fate. It is simply one of the most poignant examples. A device that could have saved countless lives, refined over generations into something even more sensitive, more reliable. Instead, it became a legend, then a curiosity, then a puzzle. And now, in our age of technology, we look back and wonder, what else did they know? What else have we forgotten? You are in Baghdad. The year is 1000 AD. The Islamic Golden Age surrounds you. Libraries tower with scrolls and bound manuscripts. Scholars debate in courtyards, their voices rising and falling like music. And in a small workshop, you watch a man named Al-Jazari carefully assemble a mechanical marvel. Gears turn. Water flows through carefully calibrated channels, and before you, a mechanical peacock spreads its tail feathers and releases water from its beak. This is not magic. This is engineering, hydraulics, camshafts, programmable automata. Concepts that will not fully re-emerge in Europe for another 600 years. Al-Jazari is not alone. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad has become a beacon of innovation. Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese knowledge flows together, translated, refined, expanded. Mathematicians develop algebra. Astronomers map the heavens with instruments of brass and precision. Physicians perform surgeries with techniques that will be forgotten and later rediscovered. And engineers like Al-Jazari, build machines that blur the line between science and art. His book of knowledge of ingenious mechanical devices contains designs for 50 machines. Clocks that track hours with water and weights. Fountains that change patterns based on internal mechanisms. Hand-washing automata that dispense soap and water automatically. Combination locks, crankshafts, segmental gears. Each innovation carefully documented with diagrams and instructions. He is not hoarding secrets. He is teaching, preserving, building a legacy of knowledge for future generations. But the Mongols are coming. You cannot see them yet, but their shadow already stretches across the eastern horizon. In 1258, Hulagu Khan's forces will descend upon Baghdad. The canals will run black with ink from burning books. Scholars will be slaughtered in streets that once rang with philosophical debate. The House of Wisdom will burn for days. And Al-Jazari's machines, those wonders of gears and water, will be smashed or melted down for raw materials. Knowledge that took centuries to accumulate will be erased in weeks. You want to warn them. To tell Al-Jazari to copy his books, to hide them in distant lands, to ensure his legacy survives. But you are only a witness, watching as he carefully adjusts a cam, ensuring his mechanical peacock's movements are smooth and lifelike. He does not know what is coming. How could he? His world feels permanent, eternal. Great civilizations always do, right up until the moment they fall. Some of his knowledge survives. Copies of his book make it to other cities, other libraries. Centuries later, European engineers will rediscover similar principles. Leonardo da Vinci will sketch machines that echo Al-Jazari's designs. The Renaissance will bloom, partially nourished by seeds planted in Baghdad's golden age. But the direct lineage is broken. The workshops are gone. The masters who could have taught the next generation lie silent in unmarked graves. You think about continuity again, how fragile it is, how a single invasion, a single catastrophic event, can sever the thread between past and future. Al-Jazari's peacock could have been the ancestor of modern robotics. His water clocks could have evolved into precision timepieces centuries earlier. His automata could have sparked an industrial revolution long before steam engines roared to life in England. Instead, they became footnotes, curiosities, lost technologies that had to be painfully reinvented by people who never knew they were walking a path already traveled. You are standing in a medieval European fortress. The year is 1340. The walls are thick stone, cold to the touch. Torches flicker in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows. And mounted on the battlements is a weapon that should not exist for another 3 centuries. A multi-barreled gun. Not a single cannon, but a cluster of iron tubes bound together, each loaded with gunpowder and projectiles. You watch as soldiers prepare to fire. The fuse ignites, and in a thunderous roar, multiple shots erupt simultaneously, filling the air with smoke and death. This is the robot, sometimes called the organ gun, and it is one of history's forgotten rapid-fire weapons. The concept is brilliantly simple. If one barrel can fire 1 shot, then 10 barrels can fire 10 shots. Mount them on a wheeled carriage, aim them at massed infantry, and unleash devastating volleys. European armies experiment with these designs for decades. Some versions have barrels that rotate, others use multiple ranks of barrels that fire in sequence. The technology is there. The understanding exists. But then, mysteriously, it fades. By the time of the Renaissance, most of these multi-barrel designs have been abandoned in favor of traditional single-barrel cannons. Why? You wonder as you examine the cold iron tubes. The organ gun is more complex, certainly. It requires more gunpowder, more maintenance. Each barrel must be loaded individually, but the tactical advantage is obvious: massed fire, the ability to break a charge with sheer volume of projectiles. Some historians believe the design was too expensive. Others suggest that military tactics shifted in ways that made concentrated single-shot cannons more valuable. But another possibility haunts you. Perhaps the knowledge was lost. Perhaps the craftsmen, who understood the precise metallurgy and binding techniques, died without passing on their expertise. Perhaps wars disrupted supply chains, making the complex weapons impossible to maintain. You see this pattern repeating. Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's secret incendiary weapon, could burn on water and was nearly impossible to extinguish. Its formula was so closely guarded that when the empire fell, the secret died with it. Damascus steel, forged with techniques that created blades of legendary sharpness and flexibility, ceased to be produced in the 18th century. Modern metallurgists have theories, but no one can replicate it exactly. Stradivarius violins, made in the 17th and 18th centuries, produce sounds that modern instruments cannot match. We've analyzed the wood, the varnish, the dimensions, but something essential remains elusive. These are not ancient mysteries. These are technologies from recorded history, from civilizations with writing and documentation. And still, the knowledge slipped away. You realize that writing things down is not enough. Books burn, libraries flood, manuscripts crumble. True knowledge transfer requires living teachers, working workshops, unbroken chains of practice. Break the chain anywhere, and even well-documented techniques can become impossible to reproduce. The organ gun beneath your hands is cold now, silent. Somewhere in a dusty arsenal, it will wait. Perhaps it will be rediscovered during the American Civil War, when inventors once again experiment with multiple barrels and rotating mechanisms. Perhaps the Gatling gun is not so much an invention as a rediscovery, a reinvention of principles that medieval engineers already understood. History does not repeat, but it echoes. The same problems arise, the same solutions emerge, and sometimes we walk paths that our ancestors already traveled, never knowing they were there before us. You are in Renaissance Italy. The year is 1478. Florence is alive with art and discovery, but you are not in a gallery or cathedral. You are in a private workshop, watching Leonardo da Vinci sketch furiously by candlelight. His hand moves with practiced confidence, filling page after page with designs. And there, among drawings of flying machines and war engines, you see something that makes your breath catch. A mechanical calculator. A device with interlocking gears that can add and subtract, carrying numbers from one column to the next. This is not a simple abacus. This is a programmable machine, a direct ancestor of computers, drawn 3 centuries before Charles Babbage will be credited with inventing the first mechanical calculator. Leonardo never builds this device. His notebooks are filled with hundreds of inventions, most never constructed. Some are impossible with the materials of his time. Others are perfectly feasible, but never attract patronage. The calculator sits on paper, elegant and precise, waiting for a craftsman who will never come. And when Leonardo dies, his notebooks scatter. Some are lost. Others gather dust in private collections. The knowledge remains hidden for centuries, but Leonardo is not the first to conceive of mechanical calculation. In the 1st century BC, Romans used complex mechanisms for astronomical calculations. We know this from the Antikythera device. In the 9th century, Persian scholars designed automatic calculating devices. In medieval China, engineers created mechanical puppets that performed mathematical demonstrations. The idea of machines that think, that calculate, that process information mechanically is ancient. What is not ancient is our awareness of this history. You flip through Leonardo's notebooks, feeling the thick paper, seeing the mirror writing he used to protect his ideas. You wonder what would have happened if these designs had been published widely. If craftsmen across Europe had access to his mechanical calculator, his gear systems, his understanding of ratios and motion. Could the Industrial Revolution have begun 2 centuries earlier? Could the computer age have dawned in the Renaissance instead of the 20th century? The questions are unanswerable, but they linger like ghosts in the workshop. This is the tragedy of individual genius without systematic support. Leonardo was a court artist, dependent on patrons for funding. His engineering marvels were sidelines, curiosities to impress dukes and princes. There was no research institution dedicated to developing his ideas, no university department to refine his prototypes, no industrial base ready to manufacture his designs. He was a singular mind, brilliant and isolated, and when he died, much of his knowledge died with him. You contrast this with the systematic approach of later eras. The Royal Society in England, founded in 1660, created networks of scholars who shared discoveries. The patent system incentivized invention by protecting creators. Universities began teaching engineering as a formal discipline. Knowledge became institutionalized, less dependent on individual brilliance. And progress accelerated because innovations were no longer locked in private notebooks or scattered workshops. They were published, debated, refined by communities of experts. But even institutions can fail. Libraries burn, universities close during wars, economic collapses halt research, and when the chain breaks, the fall is often catastrophic. The knowledge might survive in fragments, in copied manuscripts, but the deep understanding, the intuitive grasp that comes from hands-on practice, that vanishes instantly. You can read a description of how to forge Damascus steel, but without a master showing you the exact temperatures, the precise hammer strokes, the subtle signs in the metal's color, you will fail. Some knowledge lives in muscle memory, in unwritten traditions, in the quiet wisdom of experienced hands. And when those hands still forever, the knowledge becomes archaeology. You are in ancient Rome. The year is 118 AD. The sun beats down on a construction site where workers mix concrete. But this is not the weak, crumbling concrete of modern parking structures. This is Roman concrete, a material that will outlast empires. 2,000 years from now, the Pantheon's dome will still stand, unreinforced, the largest unsupported concrete dome in the world. Harbour structures will still resist the corrosive sea. Aqueducts will still carry water, their concrete stronger and more durable than most modern equivalents. And the secret to this remarkable material will be lost, hidden in the volcanic ash and lime that Romans mixed with such casual expertise. You watch as workers combine lime mortar with volcanic ash from Pozzuoli, near Naples. They add aggregate, pieces of stone and brick. They pour it into wooden forms, and something remarkable happens. The mixture does not just harden. It reacts with seawater, actually growing stronger over time. Crystals form within the concrete, filling cracks, binding the material into a substance more durable than stone. The Romans do not fully understand the chemistry, but they understand the results. They have built an empire on this material, literally and figuratively. For nearly 2,000 years, their concrete will remain superior to anything else humanity can produce. Modern concrete, developed in the 19th century, uses Portland cement. It is strong initially but degrades over time, especially in seawater. Rebar reinforcement rusts, causing the concrete to crack and crumble. Roman harbour structures, by contrast, improve with age. The seawater is not their enemy. It is part of the process, triggering chemical reactions that strengthen the material over decades and centuries. How is this lost? You stand among the ruins of Rome, touching the still solid concrete of ancient buildings, and the question burns. The empire fell gradually, over centuries, but at some point the knowledge of concrete making faded. Medieval builders used stone and mortar. They constructed magnificent cathedrals, but they did not pour concrete domes that would last millennia. The specific combination of volcanic ash, lime, and seawater was forgotten. It became a mystery, a puzzle left by the ancients. Modern scientists, using electron microscopes and chemical analysis, have finally begun to understand what the Romans achieved. The key is the volcanic ash, which contains aluminum and silicon that react with seawater to form crystals. These crystals bind the concrete together with remarkable strength. Researchers are now trying to recreate Roman concrete, not for historical curiosity, but because it could revolutionize modern construction. Imagine buildings that grow stronger over time instead of weaker. Infrastructure that lasts for millennia instead of decades. This is not science fiction. This is rediscovering what was known and forgotten. But why did it take so long? You imagine a Roman engineer, perhaps in the 5th century, as the empire crumbles. Invasions disrupt supply lines. The volcanic ash from Pozzuoli becomes difficult to obtain. Local builders experiment with substitutes, with mixed results. A generation later, their children use inferior materials because that is what they have learned. Another generation, and the memory of the original formula is hazy, a story told by grandparents. And then, silence. The workshops close. The knowledge fades. And for 1,000 years, humanity builds with materials inferior to what the Romans casually used for harbour walls. This is the vulnerability of empirical knowledge, of techniques developed through trial and error rather than deep theoretical understanding. The Romans knew what worked, but they did not know why at a molecular level. So when circumstances changed, when the exact materials became unavailable, they could not adapt. They could not say, we need aluminum and silicon in these ratios reacting with seawater. What alternative sources exist? They simply knew. Use this ash from this mountain and it works. And when that became impossible, the knowledge collapsed. You are aboard a Chinese treasure ship. The year is 1421. The vessel is massive, over 400 feet long, with 9 masts and luxurious cabins. You are part of Admiral Zheng He's fleet, the largest naval expedition the world has ever seen. Hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of sailors, navigating with magnetic compasses, detailed maps, and astronomical instruments of breathtaking precision. You have sailed to East Africa, Arabia, India. Chinese porcelain and silk have been traded for exotic goods, and China's naval power is unmatched, undeniable, supreme. Then you return home, and everything changes. The Yongle Emperor, who sponsored these grand voyages, has died. His successors view the expeditions as wasteful extravagance. Confucian scholars, who value agriculture and stability over exploration, gain influence at court, and in a decision that will reshape world history, China turns inward. The treasure ships are left to rot, the shipyards are closed, records of the voyages are burned or scattered, and within a few decades the knowledge of how to build these massive vessels, how to navigate across oceans, how to project power across continents, is deliberately erased. You stand on the deck of a rotting ship, feeling the woods soften beneath your feet. These vessels could have circumnavigated the globe. Chinese navigators had the tools, the knowledge, the resources. They could have reached the Americas decades before Columbus. They could have established trade networks that spanned every ocean, but they chose not to. Or rather, their leaders chose for them, and the window of opportunity closed. This is different from the other forgotten technologies. This was not lost through invasion or accident. This was abandoned by choice. China possessed the world's most advanced maritime technology and deliberately walked away from it. By the time European explorers began their age of discovery, Chinese shipbuilding had regressed. The knowledge of building massive ocean-going vessels had been suppressed so thoroughly that later generations did not believe the treasure ships had ever existed. When historians first studied the records, they thought the dimensions must be exaggerated. Ships that large were impossible. Except they were not. They had been real, and they had been forgotten. You wonder about the shipwrights, the sailors, the navigators who knew these skills. Did they protest? Did they try to preserve their knowledge in secret? Or did they accept the imperial decree and let their expertise fade? You imagine a grandfather, once a navigator on Zheng He's fleet, trying to teach his grandson the art of celestial navigation. But the grandson has no ships to sail, no expeditions to join. The knowledge becomes theoretical, then irrelevant, then forgotten. Within 2 generations, China's maritime dominance is a fading memory. And then, European ships arrive. Smaller, less advanced, but crewed by nations hungry for expansion. And China, which once commanded the greatest fleet in history, finds itself on the defensive. The Opium Wars, the unequal treaties, the century of humiliation, all of it might have been different if China had maintained its naval knowledge. But history does not reward what might have been, it only records what was. And what was a conscious choice to forget, to turn away, to let knowledge die. This teaches a darker lesson than the others. Technology can be lost not just through disaster or neglect, but through deliberate suppression. Knowledge can be dangerous to existing power structures. Innovation can threaten stability. And sometimes, civilizations choose stagnation over the uncertain risks of progress. The treasure ships rotted in harbors not because enemies destroyed them, but because China's own leaders feared where they might lead. And in forgetting how to build them, China forgot a piece of its own potential. You are in a medieval European monastery. The year is 1050. Outside, the world is violent and chaotic. Kingdoms rise and fall. Invaders sweep across borders. But here, in this stone sanctuary, knowledge is preserved. Monks copy manuscripts by candlelight, their fingers cramped from hours of careful writing. They preserve Greek and Roman texts, medical knowledge, astronomical observations. They are the fragile thread connecting the ancient world to the future. And they are dying. Not from plague, not from war, but from changing priorities. The church is consolidating power. Resources are diverted to cathedrals and crusades, and some knowledge is seen as dangerous. Ancient medical texts that discuss anatomy in detail, Greek philosophy that questions religious doctrine, engineering manuals that describe mechanisms with no obvious spiritual purpose. Slowly, subtly, certain texts are copied less frequently. They are placed in less accessible parts of libraries, and eventually they simply disappear. Not burned in dramatic bonfires, but fading through quiet neglect. You examine a partially completed manuscript. The monk has beautifully illuminated the first letter, gold leaf catching the candlelight, but the text itself is a medical treatise on surgery, describing procedures that will not be performed again in Europe for centuries. The monk does not understand what he is copying. He knows Latin, but the medical terminology is archaic, the concepts foreign. He copies mechanically, preserving the words but not the meaning. And when this copy is complete, it will be shelved with thousands of others, many of which will never be read again. This is how knowledge dies in peace, not through destruction, but through irrelevance. The monastery has limited resources, limited parchment, limited time. Monks must choose what to copy, what to prioritize, and they choose texts relevant to their lives, to their faith, to their immediate needs. Ancient engineering manuals are not priorities. Medical procedures are less important than theological commentaries, and so gradually the practical knowledge of the ancient world fades from active use, becoming historical curiosities locked in archives. You think about the great library of Alexandria, often cited as the ultimate tragedy of lost knowledge. But the library's destruction was not a single dramatic fire, it was a slow decline, funding reduced, scholars leaving for other cities, collections gradually dispersed or degraded. By the time any actual destruction occurred, the library was already a shadow of its former self. This is the more common pattern. Knowledge fades not in spectacular catastrophes, but in quiet attrition, in the accumulated weight of 1,000 small neglects. But sometimes, rarely, there is rediscovery. You fast forward in your mind to the Renaissance, when scholars begin actively seeking out ancient texts. They travel to monasteries, search through dusty archives, and find forgotten treasures. A complete copy of Lucretius describing atomic theory in poetic Latin, architectural treatises by Vitruvius, medical texts that revolutionized European surgery. These books survived by accident, preserved by monks who did not understand their significance, shelved in libraries that forgot they existed. And their rediscovery helped spark a revolution in European thought. This gives you hope. Knowledge, once recorded, is remarkably resilient. It can survive in unexpected places. A single copy, forgotten in a remote monastery, can reseed an entire field of study. But it also fills you with unease. How much did not survive? How many unique copies were eaten by mice, rotted by damp, or used as scrap parchment for grocery lists? For every Lucretius rediscovered, how many brilliant works are simply gone, their existence known only through fragmentary references in other texts? The monks preserved what they could, but they were human, fallible, limited. And the scope of what was lost is impossible to calculate. You are in India. The year is 400 AD. You sit in a temple courtyard, listening to a mathematician named Aryabhata explain his calculations. He describes zero, not as an absence, but as a number in its own right, a placeholder that makes complex mathematics possible. He outlines the concept of place value, where the position of a digit determines its magnitude. And he casually mentions that the Earth rotates on its axis, that eclipses are caused by shadows rather than demons, that the value of pi can be calculated to remarkable precision. You are witnessing the birth of concepts that will revolutionize mathematics, and most of the world does not know this knowledge exists. Indian mathematics during this period is astonishingly advanced. Algorithms for solving equations, trigonometric functions, the understanding that numbers can be negative. These are not primitive guesses. These are sophisticated mathematical tools developed through centuries of study, passed down through lineages of scholars, and for a while, this knowledge spreads. Arab traders carry Indian numerals west. Islamic scholars translate Indian texts. The mathematical revolution flows across trade routes, transforming every culture it touches. But in Europe, Roman numerals persist. Try multiplying MC-XIV by DCCCXLV3 using Roman numerals, and you will understand the problem. Mathematics is crippled by a notation system designed for counting, not calculating. European merchants use abacuses because written calculation is too cumbersome. European scientists struggle with concepts that Indian mathematicians solved centuries earlier, and the gap widens. While Indian scholars refine algebra, Europe is still debating whether zero is a legitimate concept or a dangerous foreign contamination. You watch as Aryabhata's students carefully copy his work onto palm leaves. using iron styluses to inscribe the letters. This is how knowledge is preserved here, not on durable parchment, but on organic material that decays in decades. Each generation must recopy the texts, and each copying introduces the possibility of error, of loss, of texts not being copied because no student is available. It is a fragile system, dependent on unbroken lineages of teachers and students. Some of this knowledge survives. It flows into the Islamic world, where scholars like Al-Khwarizmi build upon Indian foundations. From there, it eventually reaches medieval Europe, where Fibonacci introduces Indian numerals and revolutionizes European mathematics. But the journey takes centuries, and much is lost or distorted along the way. Aryabhata's sophisticated understanding of astronomy is simplified, misunderstood, sometimes dismissed as impossible. His value of pi is forgotten and later rediscovered. His insights into the rotation of the Earth are ignored for 1,000 years. You realize that geography is destiny for knowledge. Ideas born in one place must travel, and that journey is perilous. Language barriers distort meaning, cultural differences make concepts seem strange or unacceptable. And physical distance means that rediscovery can take generations. Indian mathematics could have transformed Europe in the 5th century. Instead, it trickled in over a millennium, piece by piece, often misattributed or poorly understood. And we call this progress, when it is really just the slow, painful recovery of knowledge that already existed elsewhere. This is the curse of fragmented civilizations. Each develops its own brilliance in isolation, and when they finally connect, the exchange is inefficient, incomplete. How much faster would humanity have progressed if knowledge had flowed freely across borders from the beginning? If Aryabhata's calculations had reached European scholars immediately? If Chinese inventions had spread to India and Arabia and Europe without centuries of delay? We cannot know. We can only observe the historical reality. Knowledge moved at the speed of caravans and ships, and much of it never arrived at all. You're in a Victorian laboratory. The year is 1901. Nikola Tesla stands before you, eyes bright with vision, describing a world transformed by wireless power. He gestures to his Tesla coil, electricity arcing between metal spheres with a crackling hiss. This is not just a demonstration, he explains. This is the future. Power transmitted through the air, through the Earth itself, available anywhere without wires. Free energy for all humanity. And he is building it. The Wardenclyffe Tower, rising on Long Island, will be the first of many towers that will blanket the world with wireless electricity. You believe him? How can you not? This is the man who invented alternating current, who made modern electrical grids possible. His motors, his transformers, his generators power the world. And now he promises something even more revolutionary, a system that will make power lines obsolete. No more dangerous high-voltage cables, no more expensive infrastructure. Just towers resonating with the Earth's natural frequencies, broadcasting power to anyone with a simple receiver. But the funding runs out. JP Morgan, Tesla's primary backer, withdraws support. The Wardenclyffe Tower is never completed. Tesla's vision of wireless power dies, not because it is impossible, but because it is unprofitable. How do you charge for electricity that anyone can collect from the air? How do you control distribution? How do you ensure return on investment? The technology might work, but the economics do not. And in a capitalist system, that is enough to kill it. You watch as the tower is demolished in 1917, sold for scrap to pay Tesla's debts. He will spend his final years in increasing poverty, feeding pigeons in New York parks, still convinced that wireless power is humanity's future. And perhaps he is right. Modern physicists, examining his notes, suggest that his system might have worked, at least on a limited scale. The principles are sound. The technology existed. What did not exist was a business model that satisfied investors. This is a different kind of forgotten technology, not lost through war or neglect, but suppressed by economic reality. How many inventions have followed this pattern? Devices that work perfectly but threaten existing profit structures. Technologies that would benefit humanity broadly but cannot generate concentrated wealth. The electric car, viable in the early 1900s, killed by oil companies. The mechanical television, abandoned for electronic versions more amenable to corporate control. The list is long and it is disturbing. You wonder what the world would look like if Tesla had succeeded, if wireless power had become the standard in 1910 instead of wired electrical grids. Would remote areas be more developed, with access to electricity without expensive infrastructure? Would renewable energy have become dominant earlier, with solar and wind power easily distributed through wireless systems? Or would new problems have emerged, unforeseen consequences of bathing the world in electromagnetic fields? The questions are unanswerable, but they linger. Tesla's story also illustrates the vulnerability of individual inventors in industrial societies. He was brilliant, but he was not a businessman. He trusted investors who betrayed him. He made promises he could not keep within budgetary constraints, and when his funding evaporated, his work collapsed. Unlike the institutional science of later decades, where research teams and government grants provide stability, Tesla worked alone, dependent on the whims of financiers. And when they turned away, his vision died with his career. You are in Nazi Germany. The year is 1944. In a secret facility, engineers are preparing to launch a V2 rocket. This is not science fiction. This is real. A missile that can cross the English Channel and strike London with no warning. It is the world's first long-range ballistic missile, powered by liquid fuel, guided by gyroscopes and primitive computers. It represents a terrifying leap in weapons technology. And it is designed by a man named Wernher von Braun, who will later become a hero of the American space program. The V2 is not forgotten technology in the traditional sense. After the war, both the Americans and Soviets scrambled to capture German rocket scientists and their research. Von Braun and his team are brought to the United States, where they will design the Saturn V rocket that takes humans to the moon. Soviet engineers reverse engineer captured V2s and build their own space program. The knowledge does not disappear. It transforms, it evolves. It becomes the foundation of the space age. But here is what is forgotten. The V2 program killed more people in its construction than in its deployment. Slave laborers in underground factories, starved and beaten, died by the thousands building these missiles. Von Braun knew this. He visited the facilities. And after the war, this was quietly set aside, forgiven in the name of Cold War competition. The rockets were brilliant. The scientists were useful. The ethical questions were inconvenient. So they were forgotten, buried beneath triumphant narratives of space exploration and scientific achievement. You stand in the underground factory, surrounded by the ghosts of forgotten victims. This is the dark side of technological progress. Innovation is not morally neutral. It is created by people, funded by governments, built by laborers. And sometimes, the costs are hidden, deliberately erased from history. We remember the moon landing. We forget the concentration camp prisoners who died building the rockets that made it possible. We celebrate the scientists. We forget their complicity in atrocities. This raises uncomfortable questions about all forgotten technologies. What are we choosing not to remember? What knowledge to be suppressed not because it is lost, but because it is inconvenient? The medical experiments in Tuskegee. The radiation tests on unwitting subjects. The environmental destruction caused by industrial processes we now recognize as catastrophic. These are not ancient mysteries. These are recent events within living memory, already being smoothed over, simplified, forgotten. You realize that forgetting is sometimes a choice. Societies decide what to preserve and what to bury. And often, what gets buried is whatever makes us uncomfortable, whatever challenges our self-image, whatever complicates our narratives of progress. The V2 rocket is a perfect symbol of this. We remember it as the beginning of space exploration. We forget it as a weapon of terror built by slaves. Both are true, but one is celebrated and one is quietly erased. And this selective forgetting shapes our future. If we do not remember the costs of the V2 program, we risk repeating similar horrors in pursuit of new technologies. If we celebrate innovation without ethical context, we create a culture where any advancement is justified, regardless of human cost. The forgotten victims of the V2 factories are not irrelevant historical footnotes. They are warnings. And if we forget them, we ignore the warning. You are in a modern research laboratory. The year is 2010. A scientist is examining fragments of ancient manuscripts, using ultraviolet light to reveal text that has been erased and overwritten. This is a palimpsest, a recycled parchment where old writing was scraped away to make room for new text. And beneath a medieval prayer book, the scientist has found something remarkable. Mathematical treatises by Archimedes, thought lost forever, including calculations that anticipate integral calculus nearly 2,000 years before Newton and Leibniz. You watch as the hidden text emerges, faint but legible. Archimedes, in the 3rd century BC, was exploring concepts of infinity, calculating areas and volumes using methods strikingly similar to modern calculus. He understood that curves could be approximated by infinite series of straight lines. He grasped the fundamental theorem of calculus in geometric form, and all of this was written down, preserved for centuries, and then deliberately erased by a medieval monk who needed parchment for a prayer book. The monk did not know what he was destroying. To him, this was just an old mathematical text in Greek, incomprehensible and irrelevant to his spiritual work. The parchment was valuable, the knowledge was not. So he scraped away Archimedes and wrote prayers. And for 800 years the mathematical genius of the ancient world lay hidden beneath Christian liturgy, silent and forgotten. If not for modern imaging technology, it would have remained lost forever. This is the randomness of preservation. The prayer book survived because it was religiously important. The Archimedes text survived only as an accidental ghost beneath the prayers. If the monk had done his job more thoroughly, scraping the parchment completely clean, the knowledge would be gone. If the prayer book had been discarded centuries ago, both texts would be lost. Preservation is not systematic. It is not fair. It is a chaotic process where profound insights can vanish because someone needed scrap paper. You think about all the palimpsests that were too thoroughly scraped, all the manuscripts that were completely recycled, leaving no trace of what came before. How many works by Aristotle, Euclid, Sophocles, and countless others are simply gone, overwritten or destroyed for the most mundane reasons? How much knowledge has humanity lost, not to catastrophic fires or invasions, but to the everyday need for writing materials? And this continues today. Digital storage is even more fragile than parchment. File formats become obsolete, storage media degrades, websites disappear. The early internet is already largely gone, a digital dark age where content from the 1990s and early 2000s has vanished because no one thought to preserve it systematically. We assume that digital information is permanent, but it is actually more ephemeral than paper. At least parchment can be read 1,000 years later. Can you read a floppy disk from 1985? Do you even have the hardware? You watch the scientists photograph the Archimedes palimpsest, capturing every detail digitally, and you hope, perhaps naively, that this time the knowledge will not be lost again. That multiple copies will exist, distributed across servers and archives, preserved in formats that future generations can access. But you also know that formats change. Technologies evolve, and what seems permanent today can become inaccessible tomorrow. Preservation is not a one-time act. It is a continuous effort, requiring constant vigilance, constant adaptation, and any break in that effort can mean permanent loss. You are standing at the edge of the present, looking back across millennia of forgotten knowledge. The patterns are clear now. Technologies are lost through war, through economic shifts, through cultural changes, through simple neglect. Brilliant innovations fade because they are too expensive, too complex, too threatening to existing powers, or simply because no one cares enough to preserve them. And each loss represents a path not taken, a future that could have been. But there is also hope in the pattern. Knowledge, once created, tends to be recreated. The same problems arise in different eras, and different minds solve them in similar ways. The Antikythera mechanism was forgotten, but mechanical computers were eventually reinvented. Roman concrete was lost, but modern chemistry is rediscovering its secrets. Tesla's wireless power was abandoned, but research into wireless energy transfer is accelerating. The knowledge is not truly lost. It is dormant, waiting for the right circumstances to re-emerge. This suggests that innovation is not as linear as we imagine. It is not a steady climb from primitive to advanced. It is a chaotic process of discovery, loss, and rediscovery. Civilizations rise and fall, taking their knowledge with them. But the underlying principles remain true. Physics does not change. Mathematics does not change. And eventually, other minds will stumble upon the same truths, ask the same questions, find the same answers. Progress is not guaranteed, but it is persistent. You think about what this means for the future. We are creating technologies at an unprecedented pace. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, genetic engineering, each represents power that could transform civilization or destroy it, and we are documenting everything, storing it digitally, preserving it in multiple formats. Surely this time we will not lose the knowledge. Surely this time the chain of understanding will remain unbroken. But you are not certain. Digital systems are vulnerable to solar flares, electromagnetic pulses, cyber attacks. Economic collapse could disrupt the infrastructure that maintains servers and archives. Climate change could displace populations and destroy institutions. War could erase centuries of progress in nuclear fire. And even without catastrophe, technologies become obsolete. How much of today's cutting-edge research will be inaccessible in 100 years because the file formats are obsolete and the hardware is extinct? The solution, perhaps, is redundancy and diversity. Knowledge should exist in multiple forms, in books and servers, in institutions and individuals, in digital files and physical artifacts. It should be distributed globally, so no single disaster can erase it. It should be taught widely, embedded in culture, so that it becomes more than just recorded facts. It should live in the minds and hands of practitioners, not just in archived documents. This is how knowledge survives. Not through any single preservation method, but through countless small acts of teaching, recording, practicing, and sharing. You realize that you are part of this process. By listening to this story, by thinking about forgotten technologies, you are preserving knowledge in your own mind. You are becoming a link in the chain, however small. And if you share what you have learned, if you teach someone else, if you remain curious about the past and vigilant about the future, you are fighting against forgetting. This is not dramatic or heroic. It is quiet and persistent. But it is essential. You return to the beginning, to Hero of Alexandria, watching his steam engine spin. The year is still 50 AD. But now you understand what you are seeing. This is not just a clever toy. This is a road not taken, a future delayed by nearly 2,000 years. And it is not alone. The workshop is filled with potential futures, devices that could have changed history if circumstances had been different, if funding had continued, if knowledge had been preserved. But Hero does not seem troubled by this. He watches his aioli pile with satisfaction, adjusting the fire to maintain steam pressure. He has solved a problem. He has created something beautiful and functional. Whether it will change the world is not his concern. He is simply doing what humans do, pushing at the boundaries of understanding, creating tools, asking questions. And that, perhaps, is enough. You step out of the workshop into the bright Mediterranean sun. The ancient world bustles around you, filled with people who do not know that their civilization will fall, that their knowledge will be lost, that their achievements will be forgotten for centuries. But they are building anyway, creating anyway, thinking anyway. And some of what they create will survive, in fragments and echoes, in palimpsests and shipwrecks, in manuscripts copied by monks who do not understand what they preserve. This is the human story. We create, we lose, we rediscover, we create again, and the spiral, though it may dip and fall, generally trends upward. We know more now than we did a century ago. We have recovered much that was lost, and we are creating new knowledge at an accelerating pace. The risk is that we will lose it all again, that our digital archives will become as inaccessible as Linear B, that our technologies will become as mysterious as Damascus steel. But the hope is that we have learned from the past, that we understand the fragility of knowledge, and that we will work harder to preserve what we create. You think about the forgotten inventions you have encountered, the Antikythera mechanism, Zheng Heng's seismoscope, Al-Jazari's automata, the organ gun, Leonardo's calculator, Roman concrete, Zheng treasure ships, Indian mathematics, Tesla's wireless power, the V2's hidden costs, Archimedes' lost calculus. Each one is a reminder of what we are capable of achieving and how easily we can lose it. And each one is also a reminder that knowledge, though fragile, is resilient. It can survive in unexpected places, it can re-emerge when least expected, and it can transform the future when given a chance. So you walk forward, into the present and toward the future, carrying with you the lessons of forgotten technologies. You remember that progress is not guaranteed, that knowledge must be actively preserved, that innovation can be lost as easily as it is created. But you also remember that human curiosity is inexhaustible, that the desire to understand, to create, to solve problems is as old as our species, and that as long as that curiosity persists, knowledge will continue to be created, lost, and rediscovered in an endless cycle of human endeavor. The workshop behind you fades into history, but the principles remain. The problems remain. And somewhere, right now, someone is solving a problem in a way that will seem obvious in retrospect, but is revolutionary in the moment. And whether their solution survives or is forgotten, whether it transforms the world immediately or lies dormant for centuries. It is part of the great human project of understanding our universe. And that project continues unbroken across millennia, carried forward by countless minds working in countless workshops, each adding their small piece to the infinite puzzle of knowledge.